Start. Thank you. Well, hi, everyone, and welcome to our North Central School IPM Working Group call. Our presentation today is an overview of IPM in the Department of Defense within the Eastern United States by James Butler, who is the medical entomologist for the U.S. Army Public Health Command. Before I introduce James, I have some housekeeping and some information to share with everybody, and I also want to have some time for working group updates if anybody has anything to bring up to our working group. So first, just want to recognize our funders and our sponsors, most importantly, the North Central IPM Center, which is funded by the USDA. They have funded our working group again this year from starting February or March 1st of this year through the end of February. So their funding ensures that we can have 6 webinars over that time frame. We can keep our pest defense or healthyschools.org operational. And we're doing a training for the state of Michigan, and the information will come out soon about that. And that's going to occur probably in August on a to be determined date. And then finally, the IPM Institute and some of our working group members are collaborating on interactive courses for K through 12 students that teaches principles of IPM, both indoors as well as outdoors. And we've had a couple of presentations about that work, and going into the future in this year, we'll probably have a couple more presentations about our work with K through 12 students. We're also funded by the National Education Association to do trainings for the National Education Association membership, as well as keep pest defense and our courses open access and open source. So all of our courses on pest defense are free. And then we have 2 more sponsors, Pest Boss, which is a software that pest control companies as well as schools can use to track their applications and their services and schedules. And they've also helped us with some website redesign for pest defense and a couple of our other IPM Institute websites. And then Excluder, we recommend Excluder products for exclusion of rodents and other pests, and they have been a valuable contributor and supporter of pest defense for a couple years now. Just some updates on the pest defense. You can use that QR code to access any of our free online trainings. We have trainings for 9 different occupations. And very soon, probably next week, we're actually going to have some trainings or some courses developed by Kids in Action for Biological Control up on pest defense, as well as some of our other K through 12 student courses will be included on our website. So that is all work that was recently done with Pest Boss's support and help. If you have any questions for pest defense, you can email Nikki, our new school IPM coordinator, and Bluner at IPMinstitute.org. And you can also email her to join our newsletter, which we have a monthly newsletter that talks about different pest updates for schools, and also often interviews expert. This time, I believe it was James Butler, our presenter, but we also like to interview other pest experts about a couple of questions about pest management, and in particular within schools. Does anybody have any updates that they would like to share with our working group before we go into the presentation? I'd like to give some time for that. You can either raise your hand or unmute yourself. If you do have any updates, please do contact myself or Nikki, and they can share it with our working group contacts as well as in our monthly newsletter. And we're always looking for new and interesting speakers around school IPM. So if you have suggestions of speakers or if you want to present yourself, we have either a survey that you can fill out with suggestions, or you can email us directly that information if you want to hear from somebody in a future webinar. And then I want to mention that the North Central IPM Center has their monthly Pests in Progress webinars to keep everyone up to date on the latest research related to IPM. They're hosted on the third Wednesday of each month at 1:30 p.m., 12:30 p.m. Central Time. And the next webinar that they have, free webinar, is Back to the Basics on Endangered Species Conservation. And that's on June 19th, 2024. All right. That is all the updates that I want to get through. Oh, Seth, did you have an update?
I I got a note from the IPM Center that Pest in Progress webinar has been slipped to June 26th because June 19th is the Juneteenth holiday. So it's 1 week later.
Okay. Thank you for that update, Seth. We'll update the slides on that, and also in our newsletter, we'll update that information. Thanks, Seth. All right. Now I'm going to turn it over to our presenter, James Butler. We're really excited to have him talk about what the Department of Defense is doing in terms of IPM within both schools as well as child cares. So James, I'll stop my share and you can start sharing your screen. James, you're muted.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes.
All right, and you see the slide title?
Yep.
Okay. All right, well, first, thank you, Ryan and Nikki, for inviting me to speak today. My name is James Butler. I am an entomologist with the Army's Public Health Command, specifically the Region East. There's 5 regions worldwide, and I'll get a little bit more into my region and kind of what we do in a little bit. But basically, I'm kind of a consultant entomologist kind of position. And what I'm going to talk about today is kind of an overview of entomology, pest management within the military first, and a little historical perspective. And then we'll get into kind of how pest management works within the military, specifically with the Army and then within my region, and have a couple of case studies to kind of talk a little bit about IPM and schools specifically. All right. Since I'm a DoD employee, government employee, I do have to have a disclaimer. This is, my opinions. It's not indicative of the government itself. All right. So before I jump into the historical perspective, just kind of give a little, little kind of case study here. This gentleman, he was a civilian employee that I was doing training in, and we were within the context of the training that we were doing. One of the places that we went to was a child development center, and this was a really great situation because typically we go to the CDCs and kind of walk through the nuances of pest management within that environment, a lot of the restrictions and things, and then we walk away and move on to other topics. Well, this particular situation, we're out on this playground, you can see in the photo, and this gentleman looks up underneath one of the slides, I believe it was that that kind of little blue slide there that you can see, and he's found a black widow spider, and so kind of a on the spot pest management situation. He was able to remove that spider, that risk to those children on the spot, and he was so thrilled by it. I got a kick out of it because he was just so thrilled. He wanted to get a picture taken with it, and next thing I knew, they wrote up a little article on it for him in the newspaper that installation has. So sometimes we get to do a immediate solution and be able to provide somebody.
James, I think you're having some computer problems.
One second.
Yeah, James, I think if you shut off your video, looks like you have, that might help.
All right. Is that better?
Yeah. Mhm.
Okay. Okay. Sorry about that. Technical difficulties. All right. So yeah. So with this gentleman, one thing that I always really enjoy is the motivation. So was training him on how to do some IPM inspections, and the takeaway from this was he was so motivated. He just loved it. He was able to solve a problem, reduce that threat right there on the spot. So it's a lot of fun to have these kinds of interactions. All right. So a little historical perspective on pest management and within the military. This is a chart of something in the military we call DNBI, disease non-battle injuries. And basically what that means is during a wartime or an engagement situation, it's injuries that are not part of the actual fight. So you can see here, this is a chart of some of the different wartime events we've had within the United States, number of people serving in the military, how many battle injuries there were, how many non-battle injuries, and then a little bit on kind of what the arthropod pests were. Now, not all DNBI is arthropod related, but a lot of them have been. And you can see here, just looking at these numbers, we tend to have, in many situations, more non-battle injuries than we do battle injuries. So a lot of times it is arthropod-related vector-borne diseases. And because of that, that reduces our ability to fight that fight. And so over the history of the United States, we've kind of tackled this in different manners. So, looking at Civil War, well, what happened with Civil War? We have not only major fighting, but medical, on the medical side of things, it wasn't really great. If somebody got injured, a lot of times they were in a situation where they may lose a limb, needs to be surgically removed, and they're out in environments. There wasn't a hospital system set up. They would be in, like this picture on the right, that was a surgery room out in the environment, exposed to flies and other things that could be transmitting diseases to them. And so there was a lot of uh, injuries and deaths associated with pests. And because of that, the military was really looked at it, and we actually had a civilian corps that worked hard to reduce these sanitary issues. Now, moving forward up into, say, World War I era, pest management became kind of a big focus within the military for things such as, rats in the trenches. There was major concerns with that and lots of diseases associated with it. We also looked at things such as mosquito control, and you can see this photo here with the barrel. That was how pest control was done, how to reduce mosquito threats in these environments. Let's put out a whole bunch of oil to saturate the surface of the water and smother out the mosquitoes. Did it work? Some. Caused a lot of environmental damage, though. And so, we had some improvements in sanitation, pest management, but there were some negatives to it as well. We move up into World War II, and I imagine most of us, most of you listening here, that was the time of better living through chemistry. Insecticides were a big boom at that point. Things such as DDT being applied, and at that time, everyone thought, well, hey, pesticides are the answer. Today, we know that's not necessarily true. Moving up into Vietnam era, we started looking at prevention, and not just putting a chemical out to kill them, but how can we prevent pests in the first place? And there were field units within Vietnam that were what we call a preventive medicine unit, or a medical detachment. There typically were aligned with the hospitals and the medical side of the military. And they went out and tried to do sanitation and prevent things. Now, Vietnam era, that was the 1960s, early 70s. There actually was an entity that had been established for pest management within the military. It was something called the Armed Forces Pest Management Board, established in 1950s. And this is a group of primarily entomologists that crosses all services. And what we do, and I say we because I am on one of the committees for the Armed Forces Pest Management Board, what we do is establish policy. We write regulatory documents, we write technical guides, we provide trainings, pretty much anything on a global, on a broad, bigger picture scale associated with pest management. That is what this board is designed for. Now, when we get into regulatory side of things, the biggest regulation that we have within the Department of Defense is DODI 4150.07. It's called the DOD Pest Management Program, and it aligns out all the responsibilities. So it establishes the Armed Forces Pest Management Board. It dictates secretaries of the different services, what they need to do, like what their responsibility is. It sets up the measures of merit. How do we gauge what we're doing as far as the efficiency and the safety of pest management within the entire military system? And I have a chart here. This just shows our measures of merit. This is really what we kind of are holding ourselves accountable for. And if you look at these, see here, IPM planning, every installation is going to have a comprehensive pest management plan. These documents can be very involved, 50, 60 pages or more, depending on the needs of the location. That spells everything out, who's responsible for what can be done, what can't be done. It sets that foundation that then the different stakeholders can use. We also want to reduce our total pesticide usage. Now, if you kind of look at the wording here, it talks about average use from the fiscal years of 2007, 2009. We've kind of hit this target and we're maintaining it, but the overall goal is reducing pesticides. We also want anyone applying a pesticide to be certified. In states, have their certification programs. I'm going to talk about our certification program in a minute. But anyone that's going to be doing pesticides, we want to make sure that they know what they're doing, they're trained, and they are certified, whether it's through our Department of Defense program or a state program. And then everything needs to be reported. We maintain extensive databases on what we do, where we've applied, all of that. We maintain that indefinitely. Now, the pesticide applicator program I have here, it's similar to a state. EPA oversees all of the state certification programs, and they consider the Department of Defense on the same level as a state. So we have our program is really, it's set up like it's a state. And that involves training applicators or potential applicators and gauging them, evaluating their knowledge. Now, if you look across the states, we kind of have a wide variety of methodologies in how somebody is certified and how they maintain certification. It could be, an initial exam and then a certain number of CEUs each year or every 3 years. It kind of varies across the state. For Department of Defense, we retest every 3 years. So we don't just rely on CEU credits, go listen to some presentations, but we want that competency. We want to ensure that they are still capable of doing the calculations and understanding everything. Now, I will say, I'm certified in a couple of states, and I'm certified within the DoD. And in my opinion, our program is more rigorous than many of the other states out there. We get into heavily into the laws, the pesticide basics, and then breaking up into the different categories, very similar to a lot of the other states. But the exams that we provide are lengthy and very in depth, and like a training program. It's several weeks that somebody would, for their initial, they'll go for several weeks to get trained before they can take that test and they can make applications. And then for the recertification, it's at least a week-long recertification course that they have to go to review everything before they take that exam. Another aspect associated with pest management and military, kind of goes beyond just military, but all federal facilities, is this executive order. Obama put it out in 2009, and it mandates the use of IPM on all federal facilities. Now, what does that mean? If you look at the wording, implementing integrated pest management and other appropriate landscape management practices. What's the definition of that? What does it really mean? We kind of got to get into the nitty gritty of that. It just kind of gives that broad statement. But one of the main things is no prescribed routine applications of pesticides. There really needs to be a need for that. And I'm going to get into that in a little bit later when we get into one of the case studies. I do want to kind of keep this a little bit more focused on the school IPM than IPM in general. And one of the documents that we have within AFPMB is our technical guide number 2. It's the Integrated Pest Management for Child Development Centers and Schools. And this document spells out a lot of information on what IPM is. It's actually targeted at the audience for this is the school personnel, so that they can kind of understand what IPM is, because obviously they are not trained in pest management, and a lot of the jargon and ideas, methodologies, maybe foreign topic to them. So up front, we want to educate them on what it is, why they should be doing IPM, why it's not appropriate for the pest guy to just come in and spray to kill everything. So we want to set that up, teaching them a lot of the strategies, principles of IPM. We get into things such as the notification letter for parents when an application is going to be made, of course, record keeping, and then how to develop their program. Okay, that's a little bit on kind of the broader Department of Defense, like all the military. Now I want to kind of focus on what the Army does, because the different services, we lay these functions out a little bit differently between the different services. For the Army, this is kind of how we have it set up. So first off, there is the service personnel, and I'm using the term service to indicate, like, is it the Child Development Center personnel? Is it the elementary or middle school staff? Is it the dining facility staff? That level of service personnel. And what is their role within pest management? They're not going to be applying chemicals. They're not certified. But if you think of IPM as a whole, what is one of the bases to it? It's prevention, it's sanitation. And a lot of these service personnel have a sanitation role. Now, somebody like in this picture, this is in a child development center, very young age children, and that lady, her job is not cleaning. Her job is taking care of those kids. She will be doing some spot cleaning in between caring for the kids, but is her role really sanitation? No. These facilities oftentimes have a nighttime cleaning staff that will come in and service that room to try to remove crumbs and things like that. But these service personnel who are also dealing with the children, they do have a responsibility to try to reduce some of that clutter, some of the crumbs, things like that as well. But overall, the service personnel, they have a role within sanitation, whether it's someone like her or the nighttime staff. Next, we have the facilities stakeholders. So this is the people responsible for maintaining the buildings. Now in the Army, we call that the DPW, Department of Public Works. And let's say you have a piece of equipment that is damaged, needs to be repaired. We don't call a plumber outside of post to come in and repair it. We have our own staff that do those functions. But what ends up happening is that service personnel, the CDC manager, they will put in a work order, and then that work order goes through the system, and we have a repairman to come out. They have a responsibility as well in that, let's say it's a door sweep. Do they put door sweeps on appropriately to eliminate rodents from getting into the building? Hopefully they will if they kind of understand that role. I've seen situations where there was a door sweep put on and it had a 2-inch gap underneath it. So sometimes things don't line up quite right is in terms of understanding, especially when it comes to pest management, because they may be just thinking, oh, we just got to fix this. But are they fixing it in a manner that is conducive to pests or going to help to eliminate or exclude the pests? So sometimes there's some issues there. Of course, we have pest management. Now, I talked earlier about our certification program, but more and more, we are relying less on a Department of Defense employee to do applications, and we're doing contracts. Now, a contractor is not DoD certified. They're not going to go and become certified within the military program, but their state certification is equivalent. As long as they are state certified, we do not allow registered technicians. They do have to be a certified technician. So, depending on your state, sometimes that can be a gray area. But we do require them to be fully certified, not just a registered technician, to do any applications on an installation. Next, we have the installation public health. Now, this is kind of like your county or your municipal health inspector, but kind of on steroids. They, for instance, a dining facility like this situation, they're going in there on a monthly basis, and they're not only looking at the sanitation situation or the pest management situation. They're looking at food handling. They're looking for mold issues. They're testing the water quality. They do a whole lot of environmental surveillance or testing to ensure situations are safe. When it comes to schools, they're testing the water. They're making sure things such as the bleach solution that the daycare employees would be using is at the right concentration. So they do a wide variety of things for that installation. Then we have the regional public health. This is where my role fits in, and my role encompasses half of the United States. I'll get into a little bit more later, but basically, we're kind of that reach back subject matter expert support. When things go wrong and the installation level can't fix it, we're the ones who step in and give recommendations and try to solve the problem. All right, so a little bit about my region. This is a map, shows the eastern United States, also Puerto Rico and Guantanamo Bay, Cuba. This is my region. Now, Medical Readiness Command East, that is actually my higher headquarters. This is where all the hospital level for our region is. And you can see there are two different icons here. You have the bigger kind of light blue dots. Those are what we call a medical treatment facility, basically hospitals. Or sometimes it's kind of downgraded to like a clinic, but it's still, it's a significant facility with doctors, nurses, the whole 9 yards there. And those installation public health assets are aligned with each of those. Now, you can also see there's some little kind of yellow circles. Those are satellite installations. So that would be a location, might be a smaller training facility. It might be an armory or an arsenal. It could be an area where they're building weapons, they're doing things. Those are going to have a dedicated public health asset. What they're going to get is somebody from that medical treatment facility is going to go there on a periodic basis to do those inspections. But the medical readiness command, that encompasses all of really the medical clinical side of the house. Then under that is public health command east. That's where my role is. And we are kind of on par with the hospital level within that higher headquarters. But what we do is we travel to those installations, to the medical treatment facilities. And that's where our biggest support is to work with those installation facilities and train them up how to do things, how to do inspections. Yeah. When there's an issue, I may have to fly out and do a quick consultation. For instance, last year, I went to one installation and had a major mouse infestation and a defect, and the contracted pest control was really having trouble correcting that. So I went there and looked at the situation and gave a lot of recommendations to help get that under control. Okay, so that kind of sets the stage for what we do as the Army, and in particular within the eastern part of the United States. Next, I want to talk a little bit about what we do with school systems. And I want to kind of go over our pest management plan. This was one I wrote about 9 years ago now, for Fort Bragg, North Carolina. It's since been renamed Fort Liberty, but historically it was Fort Bragg. And each installation has to maintain a installation pest management plan that goes over all pest management. But we also try to focus on schools in particular, especially someplace like this, because of how huge it is, that it kind of needed its own program set up for it. So here you can kind of see the, I hit the wrong button. So here you can kind of see the table of contents. I'm not going to go through every detail of it, but I'm going to hit some of the highlights here. Okay, so Fort Bragg is huge. There are 6 elementary schools, 3 middle schools. There's a high school that's aligned with the county school districts. There's 10 child development centers or daycare centers, 3 school age centers, as well as 2 activity centers. So if you think about it, this is like a big school system, and this program encompasses tries to encompass all of that. Now, who's responsible for pest management, like the roles and responsibilities with this? Well, why don't we start with the garrison commander. So garrison commander is kind of like the mayor of a town or a city. They kind of oversee everything. Now, they're not like commander of everything. They kind of oversee all the infrastructure. So all the buildings, all the facilities, all the environmental components to it. That's like their role. And within that, we want to make sure they are setting the stage for that installation to have pest management done correctly. So everything from designating an IPMC, I'll talk about them in a minute, to ensuring that the personnel there performing pest management are getting adequate training, education. They have a quality assurance evaluator who's overseeing the contract, if it's a contracted application. That's kind of their role, is to set the stage. Then, we have a pest management IPM committee, and this is going to bringing a bunch of the different stakeholders together to work together, because what oftentimes happens when there's a problem, it's usually because of some sort of communication breakdown. So what we set the stage with is to try to have routine meetings. Quarterly meetings is kind of our general target for this, to get everybody sitting at the same table and hashing out what issues are going on to try to solve those proactively. Now, one of the biggest people on an installation is the installation pest management coordinator. They are the primary person responsible to oversee all pesticide applications on the installation. That includes contracts, in-house pest control. They gather all of the records and they maintain and all the records set, and they send that up to the higher Army level archiving system to keep reporting and records of everything that was done on that installation. They also write plans like this. They write the installation pest management plan, and they kind of the linchpin for pest management on an installation. Next, we have the pest management personnel. Not going to get into detail on that. Y'all know what pest management personnel is, whether it's an installation's in-house or it's a contracted. You can kind of see here their responsibilities. Then we have the preventive medicine asset, and that's I mentioned them earlier. They do food, sanitation inspections. They kind of like the on-ground subject matter expert when it comes to pest management stuff, especially medically related pests. And they do a lot of surveys. So they're looking at, say cockroaches in a dining facility. They may be putting out monitors. Pest management might have their own monitoring program, but preventive medicine can do like a threshold count. So we're going to put a insect monitors out for 24 hours and look at it and see if it hits a threshold that would indicate a need to use a chemical control versus non-chemical controls. They also do things such as tick and mosquito surveys. And then they send what they collect up to us at the regional level. We can test those for pathogens. We have a dedicated lab for arthropod-borne diseases. And then, of course, lastly, we have the school or the child and youth services, the daycare center staffing. They have a responsibility as well, making sure they're following sanitation, good sanitary practices. They're using, techniques to try to prevent, keeping pests from getting in the facility. So those are the roles. There's various others that I didn't list, but I can't really talk to everything today. Another thing that we focus on is education for those like dedicated staff. Why do they need to clean up? Why do they need to do certain things? They don't understand that, how that's tied to a pest. We try to provide that for them. So a lot of times installations are going to have yearly briefings. So at the beginning of the school year, in that maybe week or two that teachers are reporting back before the students do, they're likely to have a training on best practices to keep pests out, or signs to look for. Hey, do you know what a mouse dropping looks like? They may not. And if there's a mouse issue and they see these little cigar-shaped things and not know what it is, that's a problem. So we provide that level of information for them. This particular situation for Fort Bragg, they worked with one of the local universities who has a lot of school age educational components, lesson plans for the schools that can teach the young kids, sanitation and things like that. And we're kind of building on educating the kids, hoping maybe the kids will kind of help to educate the parents and getting that information. How do you protect yourself from cockroaches, from bed bugs, and facilitating that through the school system. So it's not just pest control doing it, but it's also the education of the staffing in those schools, as well as in some instances teaching the kids to facilitate information to our our children and potentially their children. Also through things like outreach programs, you're probably familiar with those, health days, things like that, where we can talk about the use of personal protection measures, insect repellents for ticks and mosquitoes and things like that. Okay, so North Carolina, they do have specific notification requirements on pests. And so one of the things that we did with this was notification letters. So when that one of those schools is going to put out a treatment, how are the parents notified of that so that they are aware of what's going on? There actually is a registration registry where parents can volunteer or elect in to be notified of pesticide applications before they occur. Common in a lot of states, but that's there with North Carolina. Another big component to these programs are the pest management priorities. So is every pest equal when it comes to the needs to control it? No, not really. If it's a public health related threat, we have a lot more desire to get in and get those fixed quickly. Resources can be tricky. Funding to get to pay for a contracted pest control sometimes is limiting, and so prioritizing what needs to be done really helps to facilitate that. So you can see here we got public health pests. Then over on the right we got structural pests, stored product pests, down to nuisance pests. If there's a ground beetle walking on the playground, are they going to send pest control out to treat for it? Probably not. Is it fire ants? Yes, definitely. So now, one thing that goes along with these programs or these plans is what we call the integrated pest management outlines. And that's where we take a specific pest and we go into detail the general consensus of what should be done for that. So I've got a couple examples here. Miscellaneous ants. You can see here it talks about surveillance. Who's responsible for looking for these things? Well, building occupants have a role, as well as pest management. And then, well, we don't want to just go and put chemicals out. So what kind of non-chemical control measures can we use? Who's responsible for doing them? It gets down into those chemical control measures, and then any additional information, like for instance here, the limited chemical measures should be used in CDCs where contact with children may occur. There's actually, on the Army side, we have a regulation that prohibits application of pesticides accessible to children, meaning if a kid can touch the surface, that a pesticide cannot be applied to that surface. And I'm going to talk about that in a minute. Here's another one for fire ants. I'm going to kind of skip ahead a little bit. Fire ants are a public health medical concern, so we do create those as a priority one response. If that comes in for a work order, that's kind of a drop the ball or drop what you're doing and get there to fix that, because kids and fire ants, not a good mix. Rodents, same thing, surveillance, non-chemical first, chemical control measures. So that is a little bit about an example of a school pest management plan. Next, I want to talk about those public health assets, whether it's me or at the installation level, kind of what do we do? And you can see here, there's 3 photos. This was a unit I went to train a couple of months ago, and we're teaching them how to inspect for bed bugs, how to put out surveillance tools for mosquitoes, and then how do they do an inspection in a dining facility. So this is kind of my bread and butter, is going and working with these small units. Now, an installation like Fort Bragg, there may be 8 to 10 soldiers within that unit going and doing all of those school surveys, the dining facilities, putting it all out. They have a very broad mission. And what I like with this is they're young soldiers. A lot of times they are right out of high school. They go right into boot camp. They do what we call AIT, which is kind of their training for their specialty. And then they go to an installation. And so I like the ability to go and capture these young soldiers and try to get them really interested in entomology and pest management. And sometimes, like this guy, Specialist Medina here in the center picture, he fell in love with it. Like, he really liked actually the mosquito and the tick surveillance stuff. And so I really got to work hand in hand with him. And I think that's something that his career, it might influence his career. I've been doing at this for 15 years, and I've had previous students like come back to me and be like, "Oh man, I just loved your training." So I really like that ability to get out and work with these young soldiers. But at the end of the day, what's the reason for what we do? And it's this picture here, a family of soldiers, because we're not just protecting the soldier, we're protecting the soldier, their spouse, their children, any dependents they have, any Army civilians like myself, any retirees, anybody associated with that installation. We're there to try to protect them from pest issues, whether that's school focused, like we've been talking here, or the broader installation level. In game is that's what we're here to protect. And we, insects don't abide by fence lines, so we also work hand in hand outside of that installation to work within those local communities. So I'd like to thank you for listening. That it was kind of a broad overview of what we do within the Army, at least within my region. And I'll entertain any questions that you may have.
Thank you. Thank you, James, for that presentation. Really great. While we have some questions, I'm going to ask Nikki to give the poll question, please, for people to participate in. And then while you're participating in the poll, does anybody have any questions for James about the presentation or his work?
I have one question. Hi, I'm Veronica Carella. I'm from Maryland. I'm Legislative Director for the Maryland Children's Environmental Health Coalition.
Okay.
So I've been working on IPM for a lot of years. You were mentioning you're going to touch base on the rules for pesticides and small children, that you can't put the pesticide down anywhere where a child can touch a surface. Can you share that wording with us or give us
Um,
a reference for that?
it is in, I can give you what the Army regulation is. I
Right.
don't recall the specific wording off the top of my head. It is Army Regulation 608-10. And I can paraphrase that. No pesticides will be applied where kids will come in contact with it. So I was going to talk of another case study on ants, but it kind of ran out of time, so I kind of skipped that one
Right.
over. But basically, ants are a big issue that we have within our child development centers, and ants go all over in the facility, and if you can't spray for that because of that restriction on a baseboard, how do you control that? Well, they have to get very creative. It might involve drilling a hole into the wall and pumping an insecticidal dust in there to treat the area, but those kids won't come in contact with that pesticide. Um,
Is
Other
there some
things like
place we can look for that wording? Is that like public access?
it's in that regulation, but
Okay.
again, it is restricted to that
Okay.
regulation is for child development centers on an Army installation.
Okay.
The other big restriction with that is no herbicides at all in any of the playground areas.
Okay. I appreciate that.
Certainly.
We have a couple questions, James, in the chat. First, are there special IPM requirements in schools or daycare compared to other military properties?
There are, and kind of like I was just saying there, we have that specific regulation for the daycare centers. When it comes to the restrictions on pesticide use, uh, it varies by installation because that installation pest management plan, it's the formal guidance. It's based off of regulations, but a lot of times those regulations are a little bit more vague. Kind of alluded that like the executive order that says on all federal facilities, IPM will be used. Well, how is that interpreted? I mean, if you look up a definition of IPM, you're going to see all different variations in that. So the way we typically work is the top down. We have the regulations that give general guidance, and then we get down to the installation level, and those plans, like the garrison, kind of the mayor of the installation signs off on the specific guidance. So each location is different, but we do have a very heavy focus on schools and reducing the exposure of pesticides to kids.
Right. Second question, chat, what are the most stubborn pest problems at Army installations? Are any particularly unique to those installations?
Definitely we get uniqueness because I mean I'm dealing with installations from upstate New York by Canada all the way down to Cuba, Guantanamo Bay. Wide variation in pests in general. What potential are there? Ants are a big concern, specifically in CDCs. I just kids, crumbs, sugars, ants, they all kind of go hand in hand together. Bed bugs are pretty heavy of an issue in certain areas. Military, we're a very transient population. People moving, military typically move every 2 to 3 years, depending on what role they're in. Lots of travel. So bed bugs do pop out quite a bit. But I would say just as similar as outside of the gate. German cockroaches, mice, fruit flies, those are the ones we deal with the most. Stored product pests in like the commissaries are fairly big as well.
Any other? Oh, I have for military bases abroad. Can you use pesticides not registered locally but registered in the U.S.?
So abroad, it's a little kind of outside of my expertise because I'm within the continental U.S. But so Armed Forces Pest Management Board, we maintain a contingency list of pesticides that's kind of approved for all what we call OCONUS outside of the continental United States installations. When it comes to like an applicator in a OCONUS location and they're like, hey, I want to use this particular pesticide. If it's not on that list, it'll go through a process for approval. We have an entomologist, a command entomologist that works under the installation command who looks at those things. He kind of oversees the facilities side of pest management. And he'll look at those requests and he'll make that determination whether it's like a local, product from a particular country, if it can be used. But we do work hand in hand with those countries as to what's allowed in that country is allowed there and on the installation.
Any other questions? I'm not seeing any questions. So thank you, James, for your time. This session has been recorded and we will put it on our YouTube channel probably by next week for everybody if they want to review. Once again, if you want to be on any of our pest defense newsletters or updates, please email Nikki or myself. And if you have any recommendations for future presenters, please also contact us. Thank you for your time. Thank you to the North Central IPM Center for funding this webinar. And once again, thanks, James.